Welcome to Talking Family and Wealth. You are listening to our podcast episode on fertility and baby loss. I'm your host, Harriet Lahal, and I'm joined by Helen Burgess, Becky Kearns, and Clare Worgan. So thank you guys for joining us today. If we could start with just getting a little intro and a little background on each of you for our listeners, that would be fantastic.
Yep, certainly. My name's Helen Burgess. I'm an employment partner and I have an interest in fertility issues in the workplace, partly because of my role, partly because personally I went through IVF to have my first daughter in 2015, 2016. And I've since spoken to lots of HR managers and representatives who either haven't been aware of the issue or want to know more, and I help support them in putting in place policies and educating their people around it and supporting them. Hi, I'm Becky Kearns. I'm one of the co-founders of Fertility Matters at Work. We are a community interest company who are on a mission to support both employees who are going through fertility treatment whilst in the workplace, but also employers as well, to give them advice as to how they can best support their people.
Hi, my name's Clare Worgan. I'm the head of training and education at the charity SANS. SANS is the leading baby loss charity, so we provide support and resources for those affected by pregnancy loss or baby loss, but also guidance and resources for the workplace, so that workplaces can properly support those that have been through pregnancy loss or baby loss.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Just to give some context to any listeners, for anyone who might not understand, why do you believe this topic is so important and should be spoken about? It's been taboo for so long. Why do you think it's so important to break that stigma and bring it to the forefront of people's minds, especially in the workplace?
So I think if I talk particularly about fertility treatment and struggles, it's an issue that affects 1 in 6 people worldwide. We know that from the World Health Organization. And yet it's something that quite often isn't recognised in a workplace. And we know that less than half of people who go through this actually feel comfortable to disclose to their employer about what they're going through. And so we often refer to this as an issue that is very much there, but it's hidden in plain sight. And it's something that people have been going through for years, but haven't felt comfortable to talk about. And what I really feel has been a shift in recent years is the whole conversation that we've been having in the workplace around menopause, which is another topic that historically wasn't spoken about, lots of stigma and taboo. And I feel that fertility is one of the next topics that we really need to break down and educate people on and raise that awareness and put the appropriate support in place.
In terms of baby loss, it's important that we have these conversations in the workplace. Over recent years, there has been new statutory legislation for entitlements around parental bereavement leave, which include parents whose baby was stillborn. So, and if a baby is stillborn, then parents are entitled to statutory maternity paternity pay. However, it's quite a challenging subject, quite a sensitive subject, bereavement and baby loss. So even though there may be statutory entitlements or policies in place, managers, line managers, HR teams are still telling us that they are struggling to implement those policies because they don't have the words. So that actually having the conversations, the supportive conversations, and how to implement policy in practice can be really challenging. And the way to make it easier is to give individuals, line managers, HR managers, more confidence. Which is why, again, we're going to come on to talk about training, because training provides the confidence to be able to have conversations so that policies can be implemented, if there are policies, but obviously that's a separate conversation.
I also think the world of work now is different to what it was. And I think before you used to be told to leave your personal life at the door. I think now people are wanting to share more and are wanting to bring their whole selves to work and have an environment in which they feel psychologically safe, you often hear, and talking about these kinds of issues and more. It just means that people can be themselves at work and know that they can have those conversations without feeling that it's somewhere that they shouldn't be talking about these personal things.
That's fantastic. That's really lovely to hear. For those who don't know, what impacts can baby loss have on an employee? So not just for women, especially too, for male and female alike, physical and mental. I know there can be vastly different experiences, but I think that a lot of people will know that baby loss, of course, is completely tragic and it can be very hard to deal with. But how does it manifest into people's day to day? What might people not know about the physical and mental impacts that people can have when experiencing baby loss?
So obviously, everyone's experience is very unique. It can depend very much on their experience of healthcare or medical care, and how well they are physically themselves. Sometimes a pregnancy loss or baby death is caused by a medical condition, which could have obviously ongoing implications for the mum or the birth
Mhm.
person, but also could have ongoing medical implications for any future pregnancies. So often, the implications at work around that would be more time needed off work, possibly for medical appointments. Um,
Mhm.
Pregnancy loss and baby death has a huge impact on individuals' mental health. A lot of the research suggests that bereaved parents are more likely to experience PTSD, anxiety, depression, phobias. So, again, having the space and the flexibility to attend psychological support appointments is really important. So, in terms of
Mhm.
physical, and obviously, birth is quite a physical activity
Yeah.
anyway. So, even
Yes.
if the baby survives, then obviously it takes time to recover from birth anyway for the person who's given birth, the mother.
Yeah.
But in terms of other practical things, there are often elements that people don't think about or don't consider on top of
Mhm.
grief. Grief can be, again, very physical. It is exhausting, and coming to work exhausted means that you may need to put all of your energy into work. So, actually, being able to, it can take a lot of energy and effort to ask for what you need. If you need extra time off or extra flexibility, it can be really challenging. But in terms of practical things, when a baby dies, obviously there's a funeral to arrange, and no one ever imagines having to arrange a funeral for their child. And that can take obviously days and sometimes weeks, sometimes months as well, depending if there's a review or an investigation or a post
Mhm.
mortem thing. Again, there are lots of appointments required in terms of reviews and investigations. So many families will be going through a review of their care with the hospital. So that's a review of what happened to
Mm.
them through the birth and what happened to their baby to try and find answers, but also to try and prevent things going wrong for other families in the future. So again, that can take a lot of mental capacity, but again, emotional and time that may be needed away from work. So I guess the key thing is understanding there are a lot of things happening outside of work. Many parents, well, some parents will have other children, so maybe they've got older children who will also be grieving the death of their little brother or sister, obviously
Mhm.
depending on their age. So parents will be supporting a child who's grieving as well at the same time as supporting themselves. So there could be implications there in terms of flexibility needed at the workplace. So there's lots of kind of practical elements that may not be obvious.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's definitely something that not many people would know. Um, would anyone be able to talk us through the assisted conception route? So, how this can impact somebody's day to day operations and what workplaces need to understand about this time in somebody's life?
Yeah, so for those going through fertility treatment, it can be all consuming. It takes up a lot of
Mhm.
time and energy. And we often say there's the physical impact and emotional impact, and more often than not, a financial impact as well for those who are having to self fund treatment because it's not always funded on the NHS. So there's a lot of things going on for somebody when they're going through treatment. And if I was to talk about IVF, which is only one particular treatment, it's probably the
Mhm.
most common. But for somebody who's going through IVF, they will need to attend a series of appointments. These are sometimes every other day. They can be very unpredictable, very dependent on when your menstrual cycle begins, on how your body responds to medication. So there can often be requests for last minute leave to attend appointments.
Mhm.
Also, during this time, they are required to take stimulation injections. So These need to be taken at a particular time of day. So if we're thinking practically about the workplace, is there somewhere where that individual can administer those injections in a space that's not in the toilets? Because that's what often we hear from people in the workplace, that they're having to do it in the toilets. They're often doing it in silence, and they're potentially hiding needles in a sandwich box to go in the fridge, because they often need to be stored at that temperature. So there's lots of practical things going on. And also, whilst going to these appointments, they're having blood tests, they're having internal scans, and then coming often back to work to then wait for a phone call from the clinic to find out how things are progressing. So it's something that really impacts your day to day. You can't just leave it at the door and then come into the workplace. You are all consumed by what you're going through. And then at the point where it gets to egg collection, which is usually done under sedation, that's an admission to day surgery. You're in and out in the day, but you cannot work that day. So there is the requirement for time off. It's also important to talk about partners as well, where there is a partner, that they will likely want to be there to support their partner at these appointments, whether you're in a heterosexual couple or a same-sex couple, because you are embarking on this journey together. And also, where there is a male partner, they will be needed on the day of egg collection to provide a sperm sample as well. So again, there's going to need to be some flexibility and time off. Once egg collection has happened and the eggs and sperm are put together in the lab, you are literally waiting to find out and get updates on how those are progressing. And that can be a hugely anxious time. There's a big drop-off rate from the number of eggs to the number of embryos that are made. And in some circumstances, it may not even make the stage of embryo transfer. And for those people, there's a huge grief in that cycle being cancelled. But around 3 to 5 days later, if it's a fresh embryo transfer, they're required to be back in the clinic. So again, it's more time away from work for a relatively straightforward procedure. But then they are left to wait around 10 to 14 days to find out whether or not they are pregnant. And that can be a real anxious time again for people. And we know that more often than not, an IVF cycle won't work, particularly first time. We often try and refer to it as a course of treatment rather than a one-time solution. And sadly, it doesn't guarantee a baby. So for a lot of these people who are going through this, there's a lot of uncertainty about whether this will happen, but there's also a lot of impact to their day-to-day working life.
Absolutely. My next question that I wanted to ask was about ignorance when it comes to this topic. I think a lot of people who haven't experienced it firsthand can be quite ignorant to a lot of things. We know the basics and the general emotional stresses and physical stresses, but is there anything in your experience that you believe people can often be ignorant to in a workplace with colleagues, for example, with any sort of rest needed, any sort of doctor's checkups? I know we touched on it briefly before, but is there anything that you find comes up quite often, more so people who aren't going through this need to be aware of, so we can all learn to be more sensitive around this topic?
So I think when it comes to fertility treatment, there's a narrative that it's a lifestyle choice that people take, and people are opting to go through IVF or any other treatment. And actually, the reality is that most people who come to treatment are doing so due to circumstance. So whether it be for medical reasons, whether it be that they're in a same-sex couple and they want to be able to build a family. And so there are a number of reasons that people come to it, but often it's not out of choice. And that's something we see, I think, from a workplace perspective, reflected in policies where there isn't a dedicated policy for this. It's lumped in either the maternity policy and alongside procedures such as cosmetic surgery as an elective non-essential process. And so for people who find out that they need to go through treatment and their first port of call is often what's written down, what am I entitled to, they don't see that their organisation recognises this as a medical treatment, which is essentially what it is. And so I'd say that's the first one. The other thing I would mention is that from a kind of just a general level of awareness, I think for people, employees and managers to understand the kind of the magnitude of what it means to go through this as well. It's not just a few injections and a few scans, as I spoke about when I talked about the different things you're going through at the different points of treatment. There's a hugely emotional process as well. And so it's being mindful of different things within the workplace that might be difficult for someone who's going through treatment, or might be struggling, or maybe struggling with baby loss as well. So things such as maternity collections, baby showers, pregnancy announcements, all really, really happy times and things that people want to celebrate and should be able to celebrate. But it's about being mindful about the impact that that might have on someone who is struggling to bring home a baby. And so, even just simple things like if you know somebody's bringing a baby into the office, and you know somebody's struggling with this, maybe just offer to take them for a coffee, just give them an opt out. Or if there's a pregnancy announcement, if try and maybe text them in advance when they're in a safe space away from the office where they can process that news, because they will be happy for you, but it brings back difficult feelings for them as well around what they want and what they may have lost. So there's just some really simple little things that we can be mindful about in the work environment that can make the day to day a lot easier. I know from my own experience, there were times where I would go and cry in the toilet after something had taken me by surprise. But if people were aware of the impact this can have and are more mindful, I think we can avoid those situations.
In terms of baby loss, I'm not sure ignorance is the right word, but I would say there's certainly a lack of awareness and lack of insight into the implications of baby loss. I think one of the main things is around lack of awareness or lack of appreciation or acknowledgement of parenthood. So anyone whose baby died obviously has lost a loved one and has lost a child, but because the memories of that child sit with very few people and there are no shared memories with friends and family, and definitely not with colleagues, it can be easy for colleagues to kind of dismiss or not acknowledge that they've lost a loved one or lost a child. So an acknowledgement of parenthood and recognizing that she is still a mom and he is still a dad, it's just that sadly their baby has died, is really, really important. So asking about them and asking about their baby's key. So if you do know what their baby's name was, then simple acknowledgement of compassion. So I'm sorry to hear what happened to you. I'm sorry to hear what happened to your daughter. Or if you know the name, I'm sorry to hear about what happened to what their baby's name was. So it's the simple things. And if I'm honest, most of the worries and concerns that we hear from workplaces, both from line managers and from colleagues, is around worrying about what to say, and people don't want to say the wrong thing. And I've spoken to many, many bereaved parents who will say saying nothing is actually a lot more upsetting and quite isolating if people say nothing, whereas just simple acknowledgement of what's happened and an expression of compassion, I'm sorry to hear about what happened, is often all that's needed, either to start a conversation or just to acknowledge it in the workplace, and then maybe you'll carry on with work. So I guess the awareness is important around parenthood and recognizing and acknowledging that parenthood.
I think those two words, being mindful and having awareness, run through everything, because when we're talking about it, we're not talking about line managers or colleagues being experts and able to have these deep conversations with people. It's being mindful and aware and something that for them to talk about, because if it's not a lived experience of theirs, it might not be even something that they've thought about or considered, but it's just having that awareness that it's something that's happened to other people and feeling then confident to be able to talk about it. Because as you said, Claire, people want to acknowledge the fact that they've had a baby, they've had a loss, and what that baby is. It's part of their family.
Absolutely. What can managers and HR professionals consider when an employee is going through this sort of experience? What would you like to see in place? What can we make sure is happening company wide so that people don't have to feel so concerned when a situation like this happens? What can bring that comfort to an employee going through this kind of experience?
I think I'm an employment lawyer and we love a good policy. Although I've noticed the change, it's sometimes called an approach in some organisations. So a policy or an approach, I think that is certainly the starting point for any organisation wanting to show that this is on their radar. They're aware of people's life experiences. They want to support their employees. They want their employees to feel psychologically safe in the workplace. That's the starting point. But, and it's a big but, that policy just can't be a policy that sits on the virtual intranet gathering dust, or virtual shelf gathering dust, I should say. It's something that has to be lived. Managers have to be trained, colleagues have to be trained. It has to be something that it's practical. It's not just an esoteric document. And I think when we're talking about what practical steps you can put in place, looking at what other organisations are doing, sharing experiences, looking to see what, I suppose, support and other benefits are provided. So, for example, signposting of the charities, like, for example, SANS and Fertility Matters at Work, having information on the internet to help employees say, well, we don't know the answers, but we can put you in touch with people, we can help and support you. Yeah, I think for us from Fertility Matters at Work, that is always the starting point, is having that policy, and because that's the first place people will go to find out what they're entitled to. And within that, you've got to think about how you're going to manage those appointments and that time off. So flexibility is really, really key. What we're not saying is that you have to give days and days and days of paid time off. It doesn't have to cost the business. It can just be an approach where you can have that two-way conversation. What do you need? Can you shift hours? Is the ability to work from home? And what are you going to do about those times for the medical appointments itself? There's a full day for egg collection. So just having that level of understanding for the employee about what they might be entitled to, but also guidance for the manager as well, so that there's some consistency and they feel like they're able to give the appropriate support that's needed. But it's going beyond that, I think, in terms of making this change. Like Helen said, it's making that policy live. So it's about that awareness raising and training. So whether it be an internal webinar where you invite an organisation in, like Fertility Matters at Work, to give an overview of this issue, what's involved, what organisations need to know about, what to say, what not to say, but also if there's people within the organisation that are willing to share their personal experiences, bringing this to life is a great way of being able to say this is an open, safe space where we can talk about these issues. And also then those internal people being those peer-to-peer supports, being that person that you can go for a coffee with, and creating those internal support networks so that that support lives on that day-to-day basis. And so I think it's very similar, isn't it, for baby loss as well? I'm going to hand over to you.
In terms of baby loss policy, so if a parent's baby is stillborn, so it's legally and medically, a stillbirth is when a baby dies after 24 weeks of pregnancy. So those parents are entitled to the usual statutory maternity, paternity, shared pay and leave. So all organisations will have a policy around maternity, but often those policies are worded in quite an uncompassionate way if a baby dies. So parents are faced with a quite unhelpful and sometimes often hurtful policy wording. Obviously, the entitlements are the same, but the way the policy is worded can be quite upsetting. So what we advocate for is a separate baby loss policy, which has the entitlements, the statutory entitlements. Those parents are also entitled to parental bereavement leave, which is 2 weeks leave for any parent whose child dies under the age of 18. So that would go into a baby loss policy. Currently, there's no statutory leave for miscarriage, so for a baby that's lost or a pregnancy that's lost before 24 weeks. But we hear from so many people who are going through losses before 24 weeks who do need time and space, as we mentioned earlier, to physically recover, but also go mentally, emotionally cope with grief and learning coping strategies, but also the practicalities. So there is no statutory entitlement to miscarriage leave, but we would certainly advocate, and the really supportive organisations do offer miscarriage leave as standard. And there's no reason, just because it's not statutory, there's no reason why an employer shouldn't be offering miscarriage leave in the policy. And as the others have said, having a policy in place, having a specific baby loss policy in place shows that you are an organisation with a culture that is really supportive, not just for those who are going through these experiences, but actually as a line manager to be able to know what to do, what to say, how to support a colleague who's been through this. Having a policy is quite reassuring, because if there's no policy in place, line managers don't know what to do, they don't know what to say, they don't know where to turn to for support. And actually it's a human experience that we're bringing into the workplace. So it's important we support the line managers, HR managers, as well as the individuals themselves. So yeah, there's a lot that can be done.
On the policy side as well, from a fertility perspective, you need to look to ensure that that encompasses everyone. So it's not just solely aimed at heterosexual couples. It could be individuals, or it could be individuals from the LGBTQ plus community who are needing to start in their family through assisted conception. So it's making sure the wording doesn't exclude them, and they feel as if, well, actually, this I can rely on this, as opposed to trying to shoehorn them into it. And also on the time off for both, loss before 24 weeks and fertility treatment, there are two private members' bills going through Parliament. The baby loss, or I should say loss before 24 weeks, which would be miscarriage, there is a private member's bill proposing 3 days minimum leave for those who have suffered a loss. And there's also a private member's bill going through for time off for fertility treatment for both individuals and any partner they have. There's no actual amount of leave set out in that, but it's a proposal going through. But private members' bills do take a long time to work their way through. But it's something that's definitely on employers' radars.
It's great to hear that there is hope and that we've moved forward quite a long ways and we've come a long way in terms of actually discussing things, but we also know that there is more to do and that work is being done.
I think it's important to acknowledge, I think, with both of these areas, we are obviously three women, but it's sometimes often talked about as a women's health issue, which again can be quite excluding to men and partners. The impact on men, the impact on partners, the person who hasn't given birth in terms of baby loss, is equally as important. He is, or they are, as equally invested in their child as well. So having policies in place, it's important that it's for the person giving birth or the woman, but also her partner as well, that they get the support and the flexibility and the time that they may need. It's often covered under women's health, but it's important that we don't exclude partners.
I'd agree
Yeah,
with that. I think from a fertility perspective, we always hear it talked about as a women's issue, and obviously the nature of treatment predominantly impacts women, but it's very much something that men are going through as well, and often in greater silence because they don't often talk about it. And there is a real 50-50 split between female and male fertility issues. And so this is a people issue. That's what we always say. It's a people issue. It's something that affects everyone and is way more common than people even realise.
no, I agree completely. I think the inclusive language is is a great point to mention there. Like you said, there's partners, but there are also trans folk that go through fertility treatment, and there are trans people that have a baby, but it's exclusively mothers that are referenced. And that inclusive language is really important to make sure that everyone feels included at work and also feels seen. So I think it's a great point that you mentioned. Um,
I'd also just add to that, sorry, just to mention it's not just couples as well, it's individuals. So there's more and more people going down the solo parenthood route nowadays as well. And we often hear that people they don't feel represented in policy because it's all talking about couples. And so it's talking about individuals, it's talking like just use language that's appropriate for everyone, that it's not gendered, it's not making assumption that you're doing this with a partner, but it's something that is applicable and everybody feels represented by that policy.
It's actually a family issue.
Yeah.
Whatever your family looks like, however your family is made up, it's a family issue. It's a parenting issue, but a family issue as well. So it is wider because it has implications, as we've mentioned, siblings, but also it has implications with grandparents, aunts, uncles. It does have ripple effects for the whole family.
Yeah.
It was touched on briefly earlier, but hidden experiences, I think, can be very difficult to go through. So when someone turns into a hidden experience where they don't feel comfortable or safe at work, there's policy and that's fantastic and approaches to go through when an experience like this happens. But is there anything that you think a company can do in terms of culture? It was touched on briefly earlier, but company culture to make sure that when employees are struggling at work or they know they're about to embark on a fertility journey or they are pregnant and they're anxious about it. I know that baby loss can happen not just once, it's not a one time thing. It can be quite a difficult experience throughout somebody's life. Is there anything that a company can do to create a inclusive culture, but a culture where you feel like it's not a stress? It doesn't have to keep you up at night thinking, what am I going to do about work? Where a company where an employee feels safe at work. Is there anything that you think we can add on there?
I would pick up on Becky's point about sharing stories. So having people talk about it in the workplace, and I've often find that especially senior individuals talking about their experience of baby loss or fertility struggles, whatever that may be, that encourages other people, or at least provides that safe space where people can say, well, actually, I can talk about that, or I don't feel as if I need to sort of hide my personal life. I think that's a really good starting point to encourage that openness and that dialogue, aside from obviously the policies that we've talked about.
There is a wider, in some organisations, there is a wider issue with culture around pregnancy and maternity anyway. Some people that are pregnant, some women, will not disclose that they are pregnant until as late as possible for worry of discrimination. And there is a lot of research and evidence around discrimination against people who are pregnant. So again, there is that worry about being pregnant, disclosing that at work, which means that particularly with an earlier loss, they may not have told work that they were pregnant. And then the first time that they tell work, maybe because they need time off for medical appointments because they've had a miscarriage. So it's a really challenging conversation. So in terms of culture, it's creating a safe workplace so that people feel comfortable to tell, even if it's not an official submission of I'm pregnant and I will need to take maternity leave, but even they feel comfortable to tell colleagues and to tell line managers what's happening with them. But it needs to be a safe culture in terms of pregnancy in general. Even with no complications, it can be quite challenging to tell work. So that changing culture and changing, our attitudes towards pregnancy is really important.
Yeah, I think just adding on that from kind of the fertility treatment perspective, if you're talking to your employer about the fact that you're going through fertility treatment, you're effectively telling them that you're trying for a baby. And let's face it, nobody tells their employer that. And so you're showing your hand, you're saying you intend to have a baby at some point in the future. So there's all the stigma and the worry, the fears around the impact of your career around that. So that psychologically safe space is really, really important. And I just wanted to also pick up on the point of hiding the fact that they're going through treatment. We know less than half actually disclose that they're going through treatment, but also from our findings, we know that almost 70% will take sickness absence. And anecdotally, that was because people were hiding the fact they're going through treatment. So if you're looking at this from an employer perspective, you're effectively dealing with unplanned sickness absence that's going to be a cost to your business. Whereas if you create this safe space, this psychologically safe culture, encourage people to share and talk, what you could do is have a two-way conversation about managing flexible working to support that person through a life event that can be really difficult, but also then benefit from avoiding that sickness absence, knowing a little bit more about when they're going to need time, but also engagement, retention, all of these other benefits. It's not just, well, it should just be about supporting the human, but it supports the business as well. So I think there's a lot that goes into, we really need to work hard beyond a policy to make people feel safe enough to share, because that's where we start seeing those really important conversations happening.
And on that attraction and retention point, I was listening to someone talking the other day, head HR director, who was saying that they've had feedback after an interview process and someone joining them to say that they were so impressed with what they had in terms of their policies, and knowing that they might not need to access them, but knowing they were there was a real plus in terms of them signing up and say, well, actually, this is a place I want to work. If this is what they're telling me and putting out to employees, this has to be a good place. Their culture must be great. So it can actually work to attract people, even if they're not in that space and they don't need that support at the moment.
Definitely. We actually did an external PR campaign with Fertility Matters at Work when they launched their policy, and they told us that on the back of that external campaign, they received a 25% uplift in visits to their recruitment page and 11% uplift in applications. And so there's a clear link there between talking about that you're doing these things as an employer to support your employees and people actually thinking, that sounds like a really great place to work, I want to go and work for them. So there's so many benefits in this.
Absolutely. So as organisations, how best can you support workplaces?
So at SANS, as I've mentioned, one of the most challenging things is implementing a policy once it's in place. So we offer various different support. We offer training for line managers and HR managers, so we can offer live training, or we do have a pre-recorded training session that can be shared internally with organisations. We also offer a different training session for all colleagues, because it's not just line managers and HR managers that struggle. Often it's the colleague on the ground, either in the office, in the workshop, that's struggling to know what to say or how to support a friend and colleague. We also offer guidance. So we do have a template HR baby loss policy that can be used to create internal policies. But we also offer guidance around that. So guidance for HR managers and line managers. So how they can implement the policy in a human real life situation. We also have guidance for those that are going through pregnancy loss or baby death, very focused on the workplace. So it's more of a supportive document for them, validating what they're going through, giving them supportive language, maybe giving them some advice and support about how to deal with challenging conversations in the workplace. And consultancy as well. So we do offer obviously consultancy, and we can help and guide and support organisations who are implementing policy. But we do have a helpline. So SANS has a helpline which is open to anyone who's talking about or impacted by pregnancy loss or baby death. So if you are at work and you are struggling to find the words or to support a colleague, then that helpline is there. You can contact them on the phone number or the email address, and they will be able to give you that kind of direct support and advice.
Wonderful. We'll pop that into our bio as well, so listeners can find that easy access.
So yeah, as Fertility Matters at Work, we work with organisations to, very similar, to put policies in place, make sure that they're appropriate, they're inclusive. We have a knowledge hub which is full of different podcasts, downloadable resources, workshops and guidance for employers to be able to implement within their organisations to support their people going through many different paths to parenthood. We also host regular events, so we do webinars or in-person events with organisations, which often work really well when they're launching a policy, and we effectively open up this conversation. We provide a level of education, we talk about what to say, what not to say, but we also invite those internal people to come and speak and bring the topic to life, and that often results in that domino effect of people coming out and saying that that's something that they've experienced. We also have an e-learning program which is designed for managers. There's also one for all employees as well, so they can learn a bit more about this, which is often very helpful when you may not have had anybody in your team who have experienced this, but 6 months later somebody does. You've got that resource there to support you in how to have those conversations. And I think the whole idea of it is to give managers the confidence to be able to handle this sensitively. And we don't expect for managers to know everything about everything. It's really important that they've got that guidance and that knowledge there at hand. So we support with that. And we also deliver a range of different events on different reproductive health issues as well. So endometriosis, PCOS, and all of the other different things that people might be impacted by in the workplace. And the whole aim of these is to kind of break down that stigma, really open up conversations and create that supportive environment.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us today and being so open and so vulnerable about this topic. I know it's not the easiest thing to talk about, but it's so important to break down those walls, like you said, and to start having those discussions in the workplace. Thank you for listening. To get access to the very latest HR and employment law resources in a single location, download the Gately HR Hub app. To download the app, search Gately HR Hub in the App Store.